Let's read a scary story. Patty arrived at the warehouse for his first night shift as a security guard. As he stepped inside, he met Jason, his colleague who was supposed to show him the ropes. He led Patty through the warehouse, pointing out key areas like the control room, emergency exits, and security checkpoints, where he would turn a key in a box, click, and then ensure the door next to it was locked. Click. "You know," Jason said as they walked down a dark hallway, "they say this place is haunted. Years ago, a worker was found butchered here. They never caught the killer. People claim to hear noises, footsteps, whispers, even screams, especially at night." Patty laughed nervously. "Sounds like a horror movie." Jason smiled. "It does, doesn't it?" As they moved through the building, Patty started to hear odd metallic thumping sounds. Jason noticed the distraction. "It's the ventilation system," he explained. "It's old, makes all sorts of noises." Finally, they got to a section of the warehouse with high ceiling beams and scaffolding. "We need to make sure the beams are secure," Jason said nonchalantly. "Climb up and check for any loose bolts or damage." At first, Patty assumed this to be a joke, but Jason's eyes were dead serious. The scaffolding looked old and unstable, but he didn't want to seem weak on his first night. He reluctantly started to climb, his hands shaking as he inspected the beams. The higher he went, the more unstable the structure felt. Once he was at the top, Jason shouted up to him, "Shut that skylight while you're up there. If it rains, the water could fry the electrics." Patty tried to reach the open window, but it was too high. "Climb onto the handrail," Jason ordered from below. Patty hesitated, and then climbed up onto the handrail bar. He was so high up, and there was nothing to grab onto to steady himself, just a deadly drop down to the hard concrete floor. He extended his arm to full reach, and his fingertips barely brushed the pull bar when there was a loud creak and the scaffolding wobbled dangerously. He lost his balance, his arms windmilling, and with one lucky attempt managed to grab onto the skylight and steady himself. He breathed out a sigh of relief and clicked it shut. Jason watched him with an unsettling smile which never quite reached his eyes. "Looks like you could use a change of underwear," he teased, turning the key at the checkpoint box and at the door. Click, click. Next, Jason took Patty down to the basement. "Generators are this way. We're having issues with the power. Must be something up." Patty entered the room, the sound of humming machines and the smell of oil overwhelming his senses. Jason was quick to locate a blockage. "Yup, here's the problem." He picked up a metal bar and tried to pry it free. "No good," he said. "My arms are too big. You'll have to do it." He handed over the metal rod and Patty took over, weaving his arm between the machinery. Suddenly, the power went out, bathing the room in the red glow from the emergency lights. Panic set in as the machinery whirred to life, the gears and cogs starting to turn. Patty fumbled in the dark and by pure chance managed to hit the emergency stop. Everything ground to a halt. The lights flickered back on. "You almost had your hand chewed off," Jason said lightly. "Why didn't you isolate the machine?" Rookie mistake. Patty felt a surge of annoyance. Jason's attitude and comments were grating on him. "I think we've earned a tea break," said Jason, putting a meaty hand on Patty's back. As they walked to the break room, Patty heard strange clanging noises again. Only this time, he thought he heard a cry too. "Could be vagrants," Jason said, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "You should go and check." They walked to a storage room at the far end of the warehouse. Jason gestured inside. "This will be good practice for you. Go in and make sure no one's around. Sometimes they can get violent if cornered." Patty nodded and headed in. After all, this was why he was here, to keep the building secure. He pulled out his flashlight. The room was vast and cluttered, filled with crates and old equipment. He wandered the aisles, scanning between the boxes and under tarps, occasionally catching movement in the corner of his eye. As he moved deeper into the room, Patty noticed dirty footprints leading down one of the aisles. He followed them, his flashlight illuminating the path. The grubby mark stopped at a dead end, with an old, tattered mattress and filthy blankets, and clothes covered in dried blood. It was clear that someone had been living here, and their presence felt disturbing. Suddenly, a stack of crates crashed to the floor, narrowly missing him. He cried out and stumbled backwards, his heart pounding in his chest. Jason was howling with laughter. "Are you sure you're cut out for this?" he mocked, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Here," he said, tossing Patty the keys. "Get those security checkpoints for me." Patty did as he was told. Click, click. He figured he would see the shift through and then reassess whether this was the right fit for him. As they continued to the break room, Patty heard the same faint, desperate moan from earlier. Annoyed at his colleague's flippant attitude, he decided to investigate himself. "That noise is coming from this direction," he said, veering off up some stairs. Jason's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his usual smile. "Hold up," he said, "safety in numbers." They moved through the dark corridors, guided by the faint, desperate moan. Patty's flashlight beam landed on a door, slightly ajar. He glanced at Jason, who gestured for him to go ahead. Inside he found a horrific sight. A man, barely alive, bound and gagged, lying on the cold floor. The man's eyes pleaded for help as he tried to make a sound. Patty turned to Jason, but he was no longer there. He untied the man. "Can you walk?" Patty whispered urgently. The man nodded weakly, and Patty helped him to his feet. They found a small office and hid inside, barricading the door with a desk and some chairs. The injured man, struggling to speak, said that Jason had been keeping him captive and torturing him for days. Patty pulled out his mobile phone and called the police, explaining their dire situation. They were told to stay put and wait for help, but their plans quickly changed when the smell of smoke filled the room and it became clear that a fire had broken out. Patty helped the injured man up. "Time to go," he said. "No, he'll have locked all of the exits," spluttered the man. "At the security checkpoints, he locks the doors right in front of you. I guess it gives him some sort of sick thrill to be so obvious about it." The man's eyes searched frantically. "But the downstairs office, there are windows. We could get out through there." They slipped out of the room as quietly as they could and headed for the offices. Suddenly, an arrow whistled past their heads, embedding itself in the wall. Jason was taking pot shots at them with a crossbow. They picked up speed, moving as fast and as low as they could, the fire spreading rapidly. The heat was intense, and the crackling of burning wood and metal filled the air. They finally reached the ground floor office, which sure enough had windows just low enough that they would be able to climb through. The smoke was thick, and Patty's eyes stung as he struggled to see. The injured man motioned for Patty to go first. "It'll be easier if you help me through from the other side," he gasped. Patty hesitated, but the urgency of the situation left him no choice. He climbed through the window and tumbled outside into the cold night air. "Come on," Patty shouted, reaching back through the window. He helped heave the man through, and just as he was almost out, an arrow struck Patty in the arm. He cried out in pain, his grip loosening. At that moment, Jason appeared out of the smoke, yanking the injured man back inside the building. The man screamed, reaching out to Patty, but the ceiling above them gave way, and the flames roared between them. Patty fell back onto the ground, his body shaking with adrenaline. He saw flashing lights in the distance as officers rushed to his aid. The warehouse burned to the ground, engulfed in flames that roared and crackled through the night. When the fire finally subsided, emergency services began the somber task of sifting through the smouldering wreckage. Among the twisted metal beams and charred debris, they discovered scores of bodies and human remains. Not a single one could be identified, and no one ever knew for sure who Jason was, or if he ever made it out alive. If you enjoyed the horror bedtime story, please like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel to grow. And do let me know if you spotted all of the rats hidden in the pictures. Night night.